Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Shadow of the Erdtree. Today marks the start and likely interrupted short series I'll be doing. What are the best weapons of each stat type from the whole game? Meaning the originals that may have changed in 12.3 alongside new additions from the DLC. Likely interrupted because we expect a patch any day now. In any case, we're beginning with the strength type weapons, and as you can see we have S, A, B and C tiers. This tier list is a selection of 15 of the best strength weapons in the game currently. If they're talked about today, that means it's one of the best things you can pick for strength specifically. So whether it's A, B or C, if it's here, it's really good. But we need to compare them to one another, and some weapons are better than others, so they'll be higher or lower in the tiers. Also, remember this is for PvE. And one last thing is that strength weapons are a bit awkward. There are some incredible heavy-hitting bonk style weapons that aren't mainly strength. Take the new Bloodfiend's Arm, which is a massive club that actually works best when you scale it as an arcane bleed weapon. Or the new Colossal Sword, the Fire Knight's Greatsword. That's a strong mix of faith and strength. So I've tried to keep this about weapons that are mainly strength focused. So with that said, let's begin at the bottom, where we have the Black Steel Greathammer. I really like this in design and function. It's got a very standardized hammer moveset, which I find boring, but it's the unique aspects of the weapon. Any Black Steel weapon comes with this inherent passive. It scales with physical and holy damage, and if you boost it with more holy damage, it actually gets further enhancement. So it's a really good idea to run this with a sacred affinity to really get the damage going. But the other part of this weapon that's unique is the deflection stuff. It gets a unique guard counterattack, spreads out this holy aura on the ground, which pops an explosion, dealing some few hundred extra damage. It's very much inclined to a deflection build, whether you're using a shield or you're just deflecting and card countering with your actual weapon itself. The new deflecting tier is made for this purpose so that you block right as you're about to be hit, like a parry. This is pretty much one of the best weapons for that playstyle, and not only is it very effective, but it's also very easy. So I really like it, but the output's also not crazy, which is why it's lower on the list. But yeah, really cool and effective playstyle. Also down in C then, we have the Remembrance boss weapon, the Sword Lance. A heavy thrusting sword, and one of the best of its kind. While it comes with its own Ash of War that you can actually take off of it despite being a boss weapon, this is kind of one of the best status style strength weapons you could go for. Setting it up with a fast Ash of War to repeatedly poke, dealing great damage from range quickly, while building up a lot of status. It's actually very good. The thing about a slower, heavier weapon is that the status numbers are usually higher. So despite it being a slower, heavy thrusting weapon, we're able to get the speed of the attacks up through the Ash of War, triggering things like bleed and otherwise really shockingly effectively, but yeah, with high damage behind it. It's a very specific niche playstyle that's not going to appeal to everyone, but a strength status build being viable with a weapon and that being pretty damn good is a really cool thing. So it just makes it onto the list. And that already brings us to the B tier, starting here with the Anvil Hammer. I really like this one. With a weird scaling, obviously primarily its strength, but then there's a bit of dex and intelligence and faith required. With most builds you want to run 25 faith anyway, but it does require 11 intelligence to get going, which might be a couple points depending on your starting class. This is a mix of physical and fire, and its Ash of War smithing art spears causes a downward slam and then this pop out of these metal spears, which deal fire damage and it ticks over time. It's a lasting effect. The DPS on that is pretty damn good, especially useful in the open world. Otherwise, what you're doing with it is bonking, charged heavies, maybe jumping heavies, and that's it. You're going to stagger break enemies effectively, deal high damage. The actual potential of this is really high. If you're someone that goes to silly levels like level 300, this is one of the strongest strength weapons you could pick because it scales so far. It's very buffable because of the mix of physical and fire though. It's kind of like your Giant Crusher Light and played very similarly, but you get some fire damage out of it. And obviously it hits very hard. Next up in B tier, we have the Thrusting Shields. And while I'm showing the Dueling Shield here, I'm actually talking about the Carrion one in specific. There's actually a better strength weapon. It has A scaling when you put it on heavy, so you'd actually go with the Carrion one. In any case, as you're seeing from this footage, it's kind of busted, even though in a recent patch they nerfed it a bit. The idea is that you're permanently blocking and then poking at the enemy. You have such incredible guard that you're only taking chip damage, meanwhile you're poking and poking and poking them. Most attacks in the game you can block like this, which means it's an incredibly easy playstyle. You just need to manage your stamina now compared to before when it was busted. So when you're given a window to actually recover, you stop blocking, get the stamina back, and then just continue, working in your wondrous physic to help with stamina management. It's not the most flashy playstyle, and it's definitely not the highest DPS, but when you can say that you just straight blocked and then attacked while blocking with very little threat, very easily taking down even some of the hardest stuff in the game, it is a very effective playstyle that primarily scales in strength. Next up then, we have the Great Katana. This is just really cool. I recently covered this with a unique build that's 2 builds in 1. The idea is much like the Nagakiba, one of the best dex weapons of the original game, except when we put this in heavy, it scales really well with strength. We can still buff it up like the Nagakiba, Blood Flame Blade, and then run amazing storm-based Ashes of War, like Storm Blade or Storm Caller. As a great katana, it's got high damage, great reach, and a solid base moveset. You could play it that way no problem, but when you work in the Ashes of War, it gets really effective. Storm Caller causes you to spin the blade many times, hitting with the wind and the blade at the same time. Because it's a long weapon, really long reach, and because it's a great katana, the damage is very respectable. Then you've got bleed build up, procs from that, successive hits and so on, even with a heavy strength-based weapon. I foresee this to be one of the most versatile, enjoyable strength weapons from the DLC because of that. Now also down in B, and people might disagree with me on this and that's fine, is the Knight Rider Glaive. I do not like this weapon, but I still acknowledge that it is a good weapon. After all, we're talking about an S scaling strength weapon, and as a halberd type, it gets a kind of more unique moveset compared to what you're used to seeing in kind of the bonky, slow playstyle of strength weapons. It's a long weapon as well, so good reach, and because it's a halberd, you have access to a bunch of unique Ashes of War that are, underused but still very effective. The burst potential is there, the stagger value is high, it is just a potent strength weapon. A lot of people really like this one, but personally, something about it just doesn't click for me, but I still acknowledge it as a very strong strength weapon, and that's why it's even here. Lastly in B tier though, is a new weapon. It's the Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword. And it is a weird one. It might be higher in the list if it wasn't so awkward and refused to work with anything else. What you have here is a mix of physical and magic for a strength weapon, and yet it does not scale with intelligence. It scales with arcane as the other effect. It's very strange. If you take a magic scorpion charm which boosts magic damage, that'll boost the passive magic on the weapon's damage, but not the Ash of War. That scales with your raw AR, so the more strength you have, the harder hitting that magical Ash of War actually is. Very strange. It's basically just a strength weapon, and it does not synergize with anything else very well because of the arcane stuff. Despite that, it's a relatively hard-hitting colossal sword. It's very long-reaching, and it's got a thrusting style moveset. The Ash of War kind of carries this, because despite it being a slower, heavy-hitting weapon, you can suddenly gap close with this insane thrust with just the first part of the Ash of War. But right now in this janky version, it is effective, and again, the Ash of War thrust is so good for a slow colossal weapon. So I put it in an awkward B. Alright, that brings us up to A tier with the Death Knight's longhaft axe. This is a great axe with one of the better movesets of that type. The light attack combo is this 4-hit slam that comes out really quick, and it is a reasonably long weapon, so good reach to it. The heavy attack is the more horizontal swings, which are very effective at catching and are hard to miss. And as a weapon, it's a mix of strength and faith because it's got lightning scaling as well as physical. Baseline, that's really buffable and effective, and with a solid moveset, this is just a fine, good weapon. But it's the Ash of War that really pushes this over the edge and into A tier specifically. You have an iframe dodge on a strength weapon. It's a gap closer where you dash as lightning, dealing lightning damage, then you leap up into the air to slam down with a big strength hefty hit, and then there's another lightning explosion after that. So it's one of the best punishes for a strength weapon you could find, attacking by evading and attacking at the same time, potentially staggering and destroying the enemy, and if they're weak to lightning, it's just over. You could rely on the Ash of War alone and this would be an amazing weapon, but again, remember, the baseline weapon moveset is fast and with good reach, and easy to stagger with a reliable heavy attack combo, and it's so buffable that the DPS is going to be really high. So I love this weapon. How about one from the original game? The classic Rusted Anchor, which is a weird one because despite it being a strength weapon, this can do a lot of pierce damage, which is the best damage type you want. Enemies are less resistant to it. Also with pierce damage, you have more reliable counter damage, which means when you're about to be hit, you attack and you get increased damage. Trading with this weapon is the way to go. So you could include all kinds of stuff like the Spear Talisman, going for high poise and buffing for a counter playstyle with ashes that have good hyper armor like you see me doing here. The range of it's a bit weird, sometimes it just feels I should hit and I don't, and the downside of a weapon like this is that you want to trade, and we're talking about this DLC where trading can be a really bad idea. So the DPS potential is effective and high, it has a very unique damage type that you can abuse, but because it leans into trading, that's almost a limiter. That can backfire in this DLC. Next up in A tier, we have the classic ordovis greatsword, which is here pretty much just because of its Ash of War. It's a strength/faith weapon, and as a greatsword, it's fine but not amazing. But again, the Ash of War. You basically spin it around, deal damage at point blank, smash it into the ground doing AoE. If you hit with the sword and the AoE at the same time, you deal great damage and stagger potential. The DPS is super high though, because you can spam this Ash over and over and over really quickly, punishing the enemy and kind of holding them down. It's a classic, very respected pick, but it's pretty much entirely because of that Ash of War. So even though it's got great potential, I don't want to put it any higher than A because it's pretty much just an Ash weapon. Lastly for this tier though, in A, we have the Serpent Hunter, a classic weapon and one that a lot of people use for level 1 builds because it has no requirements to use. It actually scales best with strength though, and so it is indeed a strength primary weapon. The Ash of War is the classic one from the boss fight, which we will simply not use in PvE. All we're really doing with this weapon is two things. The crouch poke attack, or roll poke I guess, because that comes out super quick, deals great damage, and has insane reach, or we do the charged heavies, dealing massive damage and really high stagger value. So between charging heavies, maybe jump attacks, and the crouch poke, you can interrupt what the enemy is doing, finish them when they're low, get a little bit more DPS off, or just go for the charged heavies and break them. It is a very straightforward playstyle that's technically better in this DLC because there's a new talisman, Retaliatory Cross Tree, which enhances crouch attacks. So go nuts. For S tier though, we have some classics, starting with the Giant's Crusher. It is an S scaling strength weapon, and it comes with a unique heavy attack that causes you to do a front forward flip. Scale this with heavy, maximize your strength, and you can do some of the biggest, if not the biggest hits in a single hit with this weapon and the right build. Otherwise, you're breaking posture, staggering enemies, trading with it, and that's the entire thing. You just bonk, that's it. Pretty damn boring, but obviously very effective at what it does. Also in S tier still is the classic Colossal Sword, Greatsword, which is the most versatile, universal strength weapon in the game. You can buff it in so many ways, run so many top tier meta Ashes of War, or just rely on the base weapon itself for its incredible moveset, range, and yeah, posture break. You can see me using a new build from the DLC, actually using the Sword Lance Ash of War to make this slower and heavy weapon deal many ticks of damage very quickly. This is in fact a bleed successive hit build with a Colossal Sword. Pretty damn awesome. Again, this is just so versatile. Next in S tier then, the Starfist. Obviously, this is pretty much the most boring thing you could think of, kind of like the Giant's Crusher in terms of playstyle. All you're doing with this weapon is charging heavies. That is because for a little weapon, it's got incredible strength scaling potential and one of the fastest charge heavies in the game. And it's a combo, so it's a 2-hit. You interrupt them with a charge heavy and break their stagger so comically quick that leads to consistent critical hits. The builds that use this often increase critical hit damage, and there's a new talisman that gives you more AR after you land a critical hit. Perfect for this weapon. So yes, you're literally just spamming strength and spamming charged heavies, breaking posture critical hits, and doing it again. That's the only thing this weapon does, and it does it so well that it's so effective at killing bosses in the easiest way possible. So obviously, it's still S tier. Lastly for S tier, the last weapon on the list is the Great Stars Warhammer. You can use this in power stance or just do as I do and two-hand it and rely upon a variety of top tier Ashes of War, like the Colossal Sword Greatsword. This one comes with a pretty cool passive where you get heal on damage, so Ashes that deal many ticks of damage, lifesteal builds, that's possible. It is a very buffable weapon though. You could do stagger builds like I'm doing here. It actually has quite a variety comparable to the Colossal Sword. And I think that's what's so good about it. It's consistent and it's very effective, and to this day, it's still one of the best strength weapons. And that's funny because in the tier list here at S tier, we have two weapons that I consider just R2 spammers, and then we have two weapons that are so universal and versatile, you can run them in so many ways. But there you have it, that is the list. I hope you can understand my reasoning and how I've compared them to one another. But again, if it's even here, it's an incredibly good strength weapon. We'll be back soon with a Dex tier list to follow this up, but if you've enjoyed the video and found it useful, do drop a like, really helps. For now then, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thank you for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.